Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered about the grand design of the universe? About the forces, seen and unseen, that shape our world? Did you know that several ancient Bible prophecies, written centuries, even millennia ago, appear to have been confirmed by historical events with astonishing accuracy? These are not vague predictions but detailed accounts of future events recorded in texts that have survived the ravages of time. They speak of the rise and fall of mighty empires, the fates of great cities, and the destiny of a people, all laid out long before they came to pass. What if I told you that the threads of history were not spun by chance, but were woven into a pattern foretold in the pages of an ancient book? It's a profound thought, one that challenges our understanding of time, destiny, and the very nature of reality. For centuries, scholars, historians, and believers have marveled at the precision of these writings, finding echoes of their words in the annals of human history. The accounts of conquerors, the ruins of civilizations, and the artifacts unearthed from the dust all seem to tell a story that was first told long, long ago. Today we journey back in time, not just as observers but as investigators of the profound. We will peel back the layers of history and scripture, placing them side by side to see where they align. Let's explore 5 remarkable prophecies and their historical fulfillments. We will examine the evidence, consult the historical records, and ask ourselves a fundamental question. Are these mere coincidences, or are we witnessing something far more extraordinary? Prepare to see history not just as a series of events, but as a story that may have been written before it ever unfolded. Our story begins in the heart of Mesopotamia, with a city that was the jewel of the ancient world, Babylon. For centuries it was the epicenter of power, culture, and innovation. Its hanging gardens were a wonder of the world, its walls were thought to be impenetrable, and its king, Nebuchadnezzar, was the most powerful ruler on earth. In its golden age, the very idea that Babylon could ever fall, let alone vanish, would have been dismissed as madness. Yet that is precisely what was written. The prophet Isaiah, writing nearly 200 years before Babylon's peak, foretold its doom with chilling specificity. He wrote that Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. He continued, "She will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations." This wasn't just a prediction of defeat, it was a sentence of permanent desolation. A city bustling with life would become a ghost town forever. Jeremiah, another prophet, added more detail to this seemingly impossible future. He spoke of a conqueror from the north, an assembly of great nations that would rise against her. He prophesied that Babylon's mighty men have stopped fighting, they remain in their strongholds. Her bars are broken. He even foretold a peculiar military tactic: the passages are seized, and the marshes are burned with fire. He declared that its waters would be dried up, a direct assault on the city's greatest defense. The prophet Daniel, who lived in Babylon during its final days, had a vision. He saw a ram with 2 horns representing the Medes and the Persians being conquered by a goat. But before that, he interpreted the writing on the wall for King Belshazzar, a divine message that appeared during a great feast. The message was clear: your kingdom has been weighed, found wanting, and will be given to the Medes and Persians. That very night the prophecy began its fulfillment. History tells us what happened next. In 539 BC, a ruler named Cyrus the Great, leading a combined army of Medes and Persians, approached the city. The historian Herodotus, writing a century later, confirms the biblical account. He describes how Cyrus, facing the city's impregnable walls, devised an ingenious plan. The mighty Euphrates River flowed directly through the center of Babylon, providing its water and a key part of its defense. Cyrus ordered his men to dig canals upstream, diverting the entire river into a marshland. With the water level of the Euphrates dramatically lowered, the riverbed became a pathway. Cyrus's army marched into the city under the cover of night, through the sluice gates where the river once flowed. They found a city in revelry, its guards complacent, just as the prophecies had hinted. The Babylonians were caught completely by surprise. The mighty city, the glory of kingdoms, fell in a single night without a prolonged siege. The fall was just the beginning of the prophecy's fulfillment. While other conquered cities were often rebuilt and repopulated, Babylon entered a long, slow decline. Successive rulers and empires favored other capitals. Alexander the Great had plans to restore it, but his untimely death put an end to that ambition. Over the centuries, its magnificent buildings crumbled to dust, its bricks scavenged for other projects. The once mighty metropolis became a desolate wasteland. Travelers in later centuries described it as a place of ruins, haunted and abandoned. Just as Isaiah had foretold, it was never again the center of a great civilization. It became a home for wild animals, a place where no shepherd would rest his flock. The prophecies were not just about a military defeat, but about a complete and utter erasure from the map of living cities. When we look at the archaeological site of Babylon today in modern-day Iraq, we see the echoes of this prophecy. We see mounds of earth, the faint outlines of foundations and scattered ruins. It is a powerful, silent testament. The city that was once the center of the world became exactly what the prophets said it would be, an everlasting desolation. The precision is staggering. The name of the conqueror's people, the Medes and Persians, the unique military strategy of drying up the river, the suddenness of the attack during a feast, and the ultimate permanent fate of the city. Each detail written down centuries before found its counterpart in the historical record. It forces us to ask, how could they have known? The story of Babylon's fall is but one chapter in a much larger prophetic narrative. The prophet Daniel, while serving in the Babylonian court, was given a vision that stretched far beyond the fate of a single city. It was a panoramic view of history itself, a roadmap outlining the succession of great world powers that would dominate the stage for centuries to come. It was a prophecy not just of what would happen, but of the very order in which it would unfold. In the second chapter of his book, Daniel interprets a dream for King Nebuchadnezzar. The king had dreamt of a great statue, a colossal figure made of different materials. Its head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet a mixture of iron and clay. Daniel explained that this statue represented a sequence of 4 great kingdoms that would rise and fall in succession. The head of gold, Daniel declared, was Nebuchadnezzar's own kingdom, Babylon. This was the starting point, the glorious empire that stood at the pinnacle of power in that era. But its dominance would not last. After Babylon, another kingdom would arise, inferior to it, represented by the chest and arms of silver. This, history shows us, was the Medo-Persian Empire, the very one led by Cyrus the Great that conquered Babylon. Following the Silver Kingdom, a third kingdom would emerge, one of bronze, which would rule over the whole earth. This points directly to the breathtaking conquests of Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. Starting from the small kingdom of Macedon, Alexander swept across the known world with unprecedented speed and military genius, forging an empire that stretched from Greece to India. The Bronze Era had arrived just as Daniel's interpretation had foretold, but the Bronze Empire would also give way. The statue's legs of iron represented a fourth kingdom, one that would be strong as iron, crushing and breaking all the others. No description better fits the Roman Empire. Rome's legions were an unstoppable military machine. They didn't just conquer, they absorbed, ruled, and imposed their will with an iron fist, creating a vast and enduring empire that dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries. The prophecy didn't stop there. It described the final phase of this fourth kingdom with remarkable detail. The feet and toes of the statue were a mixture of iron and clay. Daniel explained this meant the kingdom would be divided. It would be partly strong and partly brittle. It would not remain united, just as iron does not mix with clay. This perfectly describes the eventual fate of the Roman Empire. In its later stages, the Roman Empire fractured. It split into the Western and Eastern empires and was eventually overrun by various barbarian tribes. The resulting European landscape was a fragmented collection of kingdoms and states. There was a legacy of Roman strength, its laws, its language, its infrastructure, but it was mixed with the clay of weaker, divided peoples. No single ruler could ever reunite Europe under one banner in the way Rome had. Think of the great conquerors who tried. Charlemagne, Napoleon, Hitler, all attempted to forge a new European empire, to remold the iron and clay into a single cohesive unit. And all of them failed. The prophecy of Daniel suggested that this final divided state would endure until a final divine kingdom, represented by a stone cut out by no human hand, would come and destroy the statue, filling the whole earth. What is so compelling about this vision is its scope and accuracy. It's not one prediction, but a series of interconnected predictions that map out over 1,000 years of history. The succession is precise. Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and finally Rome, which then splinters into a divided state that persists. Each empire's key characteristic, Babylon's glory, Persia's inferiority, Greece's global rule and Rome's crushing strength, is captured. This grand tapestry of history, laid out in a vision recorded in the 6th century BC, presents a profound challenge. How could a man living in Babylon have such a clear and accurate vision of the next millennium? Skeptics have argued the book of Daniel was written later, but even the most critical dating places it long before the rise and fall of Rome. The prophecy of the great statue stands as a monumental piece of evidence, suggesting a knowledge that transcends ordinary human foresight. On the coast of the Mediterranean in what is now Lebanon, stood the mighty city-state of Tyre. It was, honestly, a maritime superpower, a hub of commerce and wealth built on trade and colonization. Its merchants were like princes, and its influence was felt all across the sea. Tyre was so sure of its own strength that it actually existed in two parts, a mainland city and an island fortress about half a mile offshore, with walls that rose straight out of the water. This island was considered, well, invincible. Yet around 586 BC, the prophet Ezekiel delivered a devastatingly specific prophecy against this proud city. He spoke the words of God, saying, "I am against you, O Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, as the sea brings its waves." That image of wave after wave of attack is the first clue, but the prophecy gets even more detailed, and honestly, a bit strange. Ezekiel foretold that these nations would destroy Tyre's walls and pull down her towers. Then comes the most peculiar part: "I will scrape her dust from her and make her a bare rock." He continues, "She shall be in the midst of the sea, a place for the spreading of nets. They will lay your stones and your timber and your soil in the midst of the water." This wasn't just about being conquered. A city would be dismantled and thrown into the ocean. For a while, the prophecy seemed only partly fulfilled. The first wave came when Babylon's king, Nebuchadnezzar, besieged mainland Tyre for 13 long years. He conquered the coastal city, but the island fortress stayed defiant and untouched. The heart of Tyre's power and wealth was safe. For the moment, the prophecy of being scraped bare and thrown into the sea seemed like a dramatic overstatement. Centuries passed. Tyre's island fortress continued to thrive, its reputation for invincibility intact. Then, in 332 BC, the second wave arrived, Alexander the Great. When he showed up, the island city of Tyre refused to surrender, sure that his army, without a proper navy, could never reach them. But this is where history takes a wild turn, aligning perfectly with Ezekiel's strange prediction. Alexander, faced with that impregnable island, refused to give up. He came up with a plan nobody had tried before. If he couldn't sail to the island, he'd bring the land to the island. He would build a causeway, a land bridge, almost half a mile long, straight across the sea. To do this, he needed a massive amount of material. So, where did he get it? He turned to the ruins of the old mainland city of Tyre, the one Nebuchadnezzar had conquered. Alexander ordered his soldiers to gather every stone, every piece of timber, even the very soil and dust of the old city. They literally scraped the site of mainland Tyre clean, just as Ezekiel had prophesied. "They will lay your stones and your timber and your soil in the midst of the water." Alexander's army used the rubble of the old city to build their causeway. For months they labored, dumping the remains of a civilization into the Mediterranean Sea to create a path for their siege engines. The city was piece by piece thrown into the water. After a grueling 7-month siege, the causeway was finished. Alexander's forces stormed the island fortress and Tyre fell, but the prophecy's fulfillment didn't stop there. Ezekiel had said Tyre would become a bare rock, a place for fishermen to spread their nets. The causeway Alexander built changed the sea's currents, and over centuries sand and silt built up against it, eventually connecting the island permanently to the mainland. Today, if you visit ancient Tyre, you'll find a peninsula where an island once stood. The area of the original mainland city is gone, scraped clean as foretold, and on those shores you can still see local fishermen casting and spreading their nets to dry on the rocks. The very image Ezekiel described over 2,500 years ago is a living reality. The specificity, the scraping, the casting of rubble into the sea, the bare rock, the spreading of nets, is just too precise to be easily dismissed as a lucky guess. In the annals of history, when a nation was conquered and its people carried into exile by a powerful empire, that was usually the end of their story. They'd be assimilated, their culture and identity slowly fading into the larger, dominant one. This happened to countless peoples throughout the ancient world. In 586 BC, when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and its sacred temple, deporting the Jewish people to Babylon, history would have suggested they'd never return as a distinct nation. But the prophets of Israel actually foretold a different outcome. Their messages weren't just about doom and judgment, they included hope and restoration. The prophet Jeremiah, writing even before Jerusalem's final destruction, made a startlingly precise prediction. He declared that the exile would not be permanent. He proclaimed that the people would serve the king of Babylon for a specific period, 70 years. For thus says the Lord, Jeremiah wrote, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill my promise and bring you back to this place. This wasn't just a vague promise of an eventual return. It was a divine timetable, 70 years. It was a number the exiled Jews clung to, a beacon of hope in the darkness of their captivity. It was a promise that their story wasn't over. The prophet Isaiah, writing more than a century before Jeremiah, added an even more unbelievable layer to this prophecy. He foretold not only the return, but also named the very ruler who would make it happen. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, I will go before you and level the exalted places. He continued, speaking of Cyrus, he shall build my city and set my exiles free. Isaiah named Cyrus the Great almost 150 years before Cyrus was even born. For decades, the Jewish people lived in exile in Babylon. They waited and watched as the mighty Babylonian Empire seemed unshakable. Then, just as the 70-year period was coming to a close, the world shifted. In 539 BC, the Medo-Persian army, led by the very man Isaiah had named Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon. The stage was set for the prophecy's fulfillment. Shortly after his conquest, Cyrus issued a decree that stunned the ancient world. Instead of continuing the Babylonians' oppressive policies, he enacted a policy of tolerance and restoration for the peoples his empire now ruled. This isn't just recorded in the Bible, in books like Ezra and 2 Chronicles, it's also confirmed by one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history, the Cyrus cylinder. This small clay artifact, discovered in the ruins of Babylon in 1879, contains a declaration from Cyrus himself. On it, he proclaims his victory and outlines his policy. He describes returning religious idols to their sanctuaries, and allowing deported peoples to return to their homelands. While it doesn't mention the Jews by name, it perfectly matches the policy described in the Bible. The book of Ezra records the specific decree concerning the Jews. The Lord, the God of heaven, has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, let him go up. And so, against all historical precedent, the Jewish exiles were allowed to return. The first wave went back to their homeland, began rebuilding their society, and laid the foundation for a new temple in Jerusalem. The 70-year timeline also fits with historical events. The exile began in stages, but the final destruction of the temple in 586 BC marked its definitive start. The decree of Cyrus was issued around 538 BC, and the foundation of the new temple was laid soon after, with its dedication around 516 BC. The period from the temple's destruction to its rededication matches the 70-year prophecy remarkably well. This event is a cornerstone of Jewish history, a moment of miraculous deliverance that shaped their identity forever, but it's also a powerful piece of prophetic evidence. The prediction of a 70-year exile, the naming of the pagan king who would free them, and the unprecedented event of a conquered people being allowed to return and rebuild their nation, all foretold long before they came to pass. It really does suggest a guiding hand behind the curtain of history, fulfilling a promise made generations earlier. Our final prophecy takes us forward in time to the 1st century AD, to the land of Judea under Roman occupation. This prophecy comes not from an Old Testament prophet, but from the central figure of the New Testament, Jesus of Nazareth. The Second Temple, the one rebuilt after the exile, now stood in Jerusalem, expanded and beautified by King Herod into a structure of breathtaking magnificence. It was the heart of Jewish life and worship, a source of immense national pride. The Jewish historian Josephus described the temple as being covered in plates of gold, so brilliant that it forced onlookers to turn away. Its massive stones were a marvel of engineering. To the disciples of Jesus, and really to any Jew of that era, the temple seemed as permanent as the mountains around Jerusalem. It was the symbol of God's presence on earth, a structure meant to last forever. One day, as Jesus was leaving the temple complex, his disciples pointed out its massive buildings, marveling at their grandeur. His response must have been shocking, maybe even impossible to imagine. As recorded in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus said, "Do you see all these great buildings? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." He didn't just predict its destruction, he predicted its utter demolition, a complete leveling. This was a radical and deeply disturbing prophecy. He went on to describe the events that would come before this catastrophe. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes." He warned his followers that when they saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies, they should flee to the mountains. For nearly 4 decades the temple stood. Life continued. The prophecies of Jesus were remembered by his followers, but to the wider world, they probably seemed unlikely. Then, in AD 66, tensions between the Jewish population and their Roman rulers erupted into a full-scale rebellion. The Jewish War began, a desperate, brutal fight for independence. Just as Jesus had warned, the Roman armies, the most powerful military force in the world, descended upon Judea. The Roman general Vespasian, who would later become emperor, began the campaign. After his ascension, the task of crushing the rebellion and taking Jerusalem fell to his son, Titus. In AD 70, Titus and his legions laid siege to Jerusalem, surrounding the city just as Jesus had foretold. The siege was horrific. Josephus, who was actually an eyewitness, gives a graphic account of the starvation, internal fighting, and suffering within the city walls. The Christians living in Jerusalem, remembering Jesus' warning to flee when they saw the city surrounded by armies, reportedly left the city before the siege began in earnest, escaping the horrors that were to come. After a grueling siege, the Roman soldiers finally broke through the city's defenses. In the fury of the battle, despite Titus's supposed orders to preserve the temple, a Roman soldier threw a torch into the holy sanctuary. The magnificent structure was engulfed in flames. The fire burned so intensely that the gold plating melted and ran down between the massive stones. But the destruction wasn't finished. The prophecy was that not one stone will be left on another. After the fire, to retrieve the valuable melted gold that had seeped into the cracks, the Roman soldiers did something extraordinary. They pried the massive stones apart one by one and toppled them down into the valley below. They fulfilled the prophecy of Jesus with literal, painstaking precision. When the Romans were done, the Temple Mount was just a flattened, desolate platform. The glorious temple was gone, completely demolished. Everything Jesus had predicted, the surrounding armies, the opportunity for escape, and the total leveling of the structure, had come to pass. Today, all that remains of the temple complex is the western wall, a retaining wall of the outer courtyard, not actually part of the temple building itself. It stands as a silent witness to the magnificent structure that was once there, and to the prophecy of its complete destruction. We've journeyed through millennia, from the fall of mighty Babylon to the rubble of Jerusalem's temple. We've seen prophecies of astonishing detail. A river diverted a conqueror named before his birth, a city scraped into the sea, and a sequence of world empires laid out like a roadmap. Each of these accounts, recorded in ancient scripture, finds a powerful echo in the accepted records of history. It's a convergence that invites us to look deeper, to question our assumptions about the past and the nature of time itself. Are these simply fortunate guesses, just a collection of remarkable coincidences, or do they point to something more? Maybe a knowledge that transcends human limitations, a design woven into the fabric of our collective story. The evidence doesn't force a single conclusion, but it definitely demands our consideration. It asks us to weigh the words of the prophets against the testimony of the historians and the artifacts beneath our feet. The patterns are there, waiting to be seen, challenging us to understand their meaning. These fulfilled prophecies show the remarkable connection between ancient texts and historical events. They remind us that history isn't just a dry collection of dates and facts, but a dynamic unfolding story filled with mystery and wonder. The questions they raise are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. Which prophecy surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more fascinating history.